Turner today. And he is going to join the call, but he was in transit, so he was getting back to his office so he could dial in. So we are going to get the presentation on police procedures today. It's just going to be a little bit out of order. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and skip to item number 3, which is discussion on the RFQ process and next steps. And so I wanted to kind of get you guys back together again so we can discuss that process. I will let you know that Rich Sessi with our procurement division is on the line. So if you guys have specific questions about this process, he's going to be the best person to ask. So that's why I've asked him to join the call so he could give us or give you guys that information if you do have questions that are RFQ related. So with that being said, I did send you the Word document that was sent to me from Rich. Hopefully you had an opportunity to kind of look over that. That to me seems a little bit more than what you guys are necessarily going to need based off of my discussions with Rich. But essentially what we're looking for in today's meeting is for you guys to come to an agreement of who's going to represent this group. I think that'll be a good process instead of trying to reconvene this group every single time. If we can pick a few representatives to give the study session presentation on the 10th and to be the individuals who not only create that RFQ, but also do the interviews once the responses come back in, it would be those same sets of individuals. So I'd like you guys to have a little bit of discussion on that today and then make a motion to decide who's going to represent you as a group in those upcoming steps. So whoever wants to go ahead and start that discussion, go ahead.
Okay, since I'm not scared to say anything anytime, I would definitely like, I know a lot of people work, a lot of people are doing things, but if it's possible, I definitely would want Meredith because I like how she hears many voices and she retains the different aspects of what people say. And so I would like to include her on that as being a representative.
I second for Meredith. Due to those same regards. And since I presented already in February, I do not want to present in the study session. I feel that would be good for someone else to speak up. I have no problem with helping with the RFQ development and also the picking of it. But if we would prefer someone who doesn't work for the city to be a part of that process, just to avoid any conflict, then I would prefer that.
Okay, so right now we do have a motion on the floor to select Meredith as being one of the representatives, if she's willing to do that, which I think from our previous meeting, she said she would be willing to take on that role. If no one has any objections, then we'll have Meredith be the first person to fill one of those slots. Okay, Meredith, you are person number 1. So I think the best option for this group is either to pick 3 people or 2 people. So who would be the second person? Are there any recommendations for a second person to represent this group in the next upcoming steps?
I'll jump in there and volunteer myself.
I'll second that.
I was gonna nominate you.
Okay, I rescind my nomination so that Casey can.
Am I slow?
I'll second that nomination.
All right, so if there's no objections to Thad being the second person to represent this group, then we will include Thad on that as well. And Meredith has asked what time the study session is on the 10th. That is at 10 o'clock. It is not at 10 o'clock. That's a lie. It's at 6 o'clock on the 10th. So it'll start at 6. You guys will probably be either the first or second presentation. So you'd want to be there at 6.
And Becky,
okay,
just to clarify for Thad and I, so we're prepared. I know our next steps will include reviewing the RFQ, and I think you had pointed to the operation letter less as a good example, and I think it's pretty straightforward, and we can pull directly from the Word document we shared as kind of a baseline for that. Do you expect us to present our recommendation and actually walk through the RFQ in anticipation of the meeting where the council will actually take action and vote? What would you like to see happen at the work session?
So at the study session, I think really what the expectation is that you don't necessarily have to have the RFQ written out. And I have a few additional things to add to that as well. You don't necessarily have to have that written out by the 10th. It's more of, this is what we're looking for as a committee. This is why we're looking for it. Maybe give them, because again, Rome made a good point at our last meeting. We do have some new council members that weren't able to be there whenever you guys had your first presentation in February. So maybe give them a quick overview of what you guys have been working on up to this point, and then why you guys are asking for the city to consider going through the RFQ process. See if they have any feedback on that, and then kind of go from there. But your presentation piece, I think, is, you know, an update of what you guys have been doing and why you guys are wanting to go through the RFQ process for this next step. So with that being said, like I said, I did have some additional feedback from the staff perspective on the RFQ process. So, I'm sorry?
You said about, well, because can I nominate someone else since you said there are about 3 people?
Yeah, if you guys want to have a third person, I think that's completely acceptable. Who would you like to nominate, Thad?
Well, and it obviously is if they're available. I would like to see Helen Hurley, if she's available to get in here on this, because I really appreciate her perspective in her area of expertise and what she does.
I would be available, Thad.
Yay.
Do we have a second on that?
I'll second it.
I'll second that.
All right. If there's no objections, then Helen will be the third person to represent the group.
All right, thank you.
Perfect, thank you, Thad. Okay, so with the RFQ process, I received some information regarding, let me see here, some public engagement. So basically it's citizen engagement regarding what that RFQ should also look like. And that's one of the steps that staff has recommended that we potentially incorporate into this process. So as we are drafting the RFQ, there should be some citizen engagement in that to see what they think would also be a good, you know, good qualities to have in the RFQ process for who is essentially not only representing this committee in the dialogue as the moderator, but the community as a whole. So part of staff's recommendation for this process is that you do get that community engagement while you're drafting the requirements of the RFQ.
And with that being said, some of the community engagement, which will include some of these members, because, you know, since these are the people willing to come to the table in the first place, I think the concerned citizens, Casey's part of that, I'm a part of that, and Mr. and Mrs. Harris, and possibly 1 or 2 other members. So that would give you 6 people community engagement, you know, because that would be good representation on this RFQ. I think those voices need to be part of it.
So I think with the subcommittee, if you will, that you've created out of Meredith, Thad, and Helen, I think that's something that you 3 would probably want to go ahead and discuss amongst yourselves on what that community engagement looks like. Again, you're representing this committee as a whole on that process. And I think that's part of this subcommittee's process to kind of massage that out, for lack of better terms, and figure out how you get that community engagement. And so as I was speaking with staff, I kind of came up with a very rough timeline. So if you need more time and you want more time, that's acceptable. These deadlines aren't set in stone by any means. So obviously on August the 10th, we have the study session. That is a set in stone date. That's the only study session that we have prior to our council going into their strategic planning session on the 10th, or excuse me, on the 20th. So that study session will have to happen, but again, that is really more informational than anything. So you don't have to have, you know, everything laid out there on the 10th. The next benchmark date that I have is, let's see here, the 31st of August. And what I have here would be that initial draft that you as the subcommittee would be creating for that RFQ. Once you have that draft completed, then you would go into your public engagement piece to get feedback from the public for the RFQ that you drafted. Given, obviously, we have to have something to kind of engage the public on, so you will have to have a little bit of a rough draft there to get out to them.
Becky, before you go into the next milestone, what's the format for that? Is that a survey form? Is that a listening session? And how long does that have to be open for community engagement for a period of time? Is it a couple of days? Is it a week?
I think that's something that this subcommittee probably can determine how you want to engage. I would say with current state of events, I mean, if you wanted to hold maybe virtual meetings, that would be fine. I think you'd probably benefit from maybe just sending out like a survey, just an email survey. I don't think it has to be anything too large to where it takes, 4 or 5 months to complete. I don't think that's the purpose of it. It is just to get a general idea of what, the community is looking for in this RFQ. So as far as the public engagement piece on it, what I have right now is 2 weeks just to get just to see what's out there kind of thing. But if you feel like you need more time than the 2 weeks, I think that's appropriate. And then I would ask for that subcommittee to come back to us and let us know how much time you feel like you would need for that public engagement piece.
And then we can't use staff time and resources, but do you think we would be able to tap into Meg's office to push that survey out if that's what we decided to do, or we just need to use our own grassroots, try to share the survey however we can?
I mean, I feel like I think we could probably work with Meg on that a little bit to maybe push it out to social media and see what our options are there. I'm not going to volunteer her office for anything, obviously, but I'm more than happy to have that conversation with her to see if that's something she could help us with in getting it out to more people, because I think that's the point, as many people as we can, touch in that sense. So yeah, so again, the time frame that I put on that was between 8/31, which was the day that you guys would ultimately be finished drafting it, to 9/11, which would essentially be about 2 weeks. But again, if you need more time in that public engagement piece, or you feel like more time would be needed, then I think that is acceptable to extend out. The 9/11 date actually works a little bit, because then on 9/14, we have another study session. And I think that would be a good opportunity for you guys to present to the council what you have determined to be part of the RFQ. And you can present that to the council and get any feedback that you would need from them before we actually issue out the RFQ. And then with my rough timeline, the week of 9/14 is when city staff would issue out that RFQ, and we would start that process.
And one other details question, the council does not need to take action to actually approve the posting of an RFQ?
No.
Okay.
No, that is really just informational to kind of keep them in the loop and to get that additional council buy-in for that RFQ process. So if they have any comments, questions, or concerns about that, then you guys you'll know at the study sessions, like if they have any feedback, positive or negative, to what you're recommending. And that is all I have as far as the timeline. Did you guys have any additional questions on that? Did you have any questions regarding the process for Rich, since he has generously joined the call for us?
So just for me, for clarification, what are we asking citizens specifically about? Is it about the RFQ, or what they want, what area, or is it what the goal of the RFQ is?
It would be the RFQ. So essentially, you guys will draft what you think needs to be in the RFQ. So those line items of things that you feel like a good moderator would need. And Rich, please correct me if I'm wrong on what that list looks like. And then we would then essentially send it out for public engagement to see if they agree that those are the important things that need to be included in that RFQ, or if they feel like we need to include more things to get the right person to be the moderator for the next steps.
Okay.
Yeah, Becky, I think you summarized it pretty well as far as what the purpose is, because when you're doing this process, what you're trying to do is you're trying to come up with a broad scope of things that you're looking for whoever these people are, that, you know, person or persons that will be doing this moderation facilitation process. What are these qualities? And so from listening from the conversation, I think you guys have a good approach. More feedback, the better, because, you know, you want to have people in place eventually that everybody thinks are fair-minded and has the best, you know, thought process to make this whole, you know, the end goal happen. You know, you want somebody in a facilitating role that, you know, has awareness of all the different needs of the community, what the background of the community is. And I think you guys are off to, you know, a good thought process by trying to get as much engagement as possible prior to putting something out there.
Can I ask a question then? So for this RFQ, when we send things out on this email, I'm thinking it is a possibility to have two. You know, I'm just getting down specifics so I'll know when I send things out to people. It is a possibility of having two. Does finance matter with an RFQ? And then also, should we cut it off? You know, just 5 candidates or whatever, or I would like to know specifics on those things.
Well, when it comes to qualifications, solicitation, you're not asking for money. What you're trying to merely find out is, based upon the needs of the role or the job that you're trying to get filled, you collectively as a group with citizen and council feedback, you're looking for the qualities, and price is not a factor at this stage.
Okay, price is not a factor, just making sure. I was throwing it out there because when we talked previously, price was a factor a little bit. And so, you know, I'm just wondering, they have a hard job. So I just want them to take in consideration, because our funds were said to be smaller than we would hope. So let's remember that price is a factor a little bit, because all people are different. And so, and we did talk about that. That's the only reason I mentioned it. And I think like that, because we do have a smaller budget than we admit.
Yeah, I get it. But yeah, I mean, you know, you gotta, first of all, find out who's the best fit. And then, you know, once you have a pool of people, then later, after you get that pool of people, then you can start talking price. But, you know, we're at the first phase of the process.
So I think a point on that, and this is something I think that and Helen and I will need to discuss, but I'd love to hear some input from the group. Originally, when we put that kind of foundational document together, we landed that we thought a facilitator would be good just to help us with some structure and function, like where our next step should sit. But what I hear Rick saying is that, and we might need to broaden this up a little bit, we're not at the point where we're looking for a facilitator to evaluate and assess our community, our history of work, our way forward, integration into the comprehensive and strategic plan, and then hire the facilitator that will walk alongside us for the next 2 years to do this work. We were just looking for a facilitator to help us orchestrate a listening session between the Human Relations Commission and our task force to figure out what, you know, nuts and bolts, what we should look like, where should we fall, and what the recommendation is to the council. So I guess I want us to be clear in that RFQ, and when we look for folks, I would think the ones who are bidding on this know that this is just step one, and maybe we articulate that in the RFQ so that they know if we do a good job, if we secure this contract with the city to do this work, we could potentially, since we have history in working with these partners, we could potentially be the firm of choice that continues this diversity and inclusion work for the next 2 years. But I want it to be clear to even the general public, this is not the end all be all contractor that's going to help us execute diversity and inclusion. This was just what do we look like, where are we structured, and where do we fall? Does that make sense? Does everybody understand? Do we have some?
That helped clarify it. That clarified it, Meredith.
Yeah.
Good explanation.
Okay, good. I was starting to get a little heartburn to think about the RFQ that we had to write, but that seems like a further down the line next step. And I think to your point, Nina, to what Rick was saying too, is that, you know, we essentially get the chance to write the pie in the sky, but it's up to the vendors to then say, well, I could do all of this and more for this price. And so they need to try to submit the most competitive package and proposal that they can. And then we come back to the council because we've already been in front of them twice at the study session. Hopefully they will understand the work is vested. There are people who there's general public support from it. And even though our budget is thin, they will work to try to find a way to make it happen. I would hate to do this RFQ process, have a great, you know, firm willing to go, and then we have no money to execute it. So we have to make that clear, I think, in the study session presentation too.
And while you're talking about that, here's just something off the top of my head. You know, when you talk about the funds available for whoever or individual or persons is that will fill the role, consider maybe, you know, when you put out the RFQ, and just throwing something out for thoughts, publicizing whatever your budget is. Just a thought, because then I only say that because, you know, then you get the people that really say, okay, it's worth my time to actually, you know, submit my background, my qualifications. Now, that's not saying you're ready to hire and you know, based on that, because it's just a qualifications request. It's not the actual hiring itself. So I just wanted to put that out there for you since we're, you know, budget conscious.
And that's what I meant. I think people need to know where you stand with that. And that's why I always thought a budget had to be there. Budgets are necessary these days. And that's what I meant. We have to put that on something so people say, oh, I can't do that for that. It kind of lets you know where people stand. And that's why I kept mentioning it. Sorry.
Who sets that budget?
That's a great question, Thad. So, I mean, I would assume that the city would set the budget. So what I would recommend to this group is maybe incorporating that into your presentation on the 10th, on, you know, just putting it out there that there would need to be some sort of budget set ahead of time in order to be able to issue out the RFQ to get that dialogue rolling. And then, I mean, obviously, I'll start working with staff now, but it should at least be kind of incorporated into your study session presentation. But I'll start working on my end to see if I can figure out where we would get that commitment or how much that commitment is. Any other questions or comments that we want to have for item number 3 on the agenda?
All right, one more. So just, I just want to know this. So when you've had a study session before on something, does anyone remember the amount that was paid to that person, or have we ever done that before? I just want to know from my own, because I'm a question asker.
I can't.
Anybody know a number?
I think what you're asking, I can't speak for the council in previous study sessions, but what I have seen average, depending on the work, any kind of consultation fees, usually they charge about $350 to $500 an hour, depending on what they're doing and the level of work. So, I mean, again, we might need to get with Roman and do some research real quick. Again, since we're not doing the bigger plan of diversity and inclusion work, but just a facilitator who can facilitate a listening, visioning session. The top range I've heard is $500 an hour. And if we're talking about half a day, no more than 45 hours to begin. That would be open.
Yeah,
something
that's what
I may be able to possibly
Thanks,
do is to check with, is just to run this sample RFQ by a couple of people just to get a couple figures, and I can send those in an email to the group if that would help.
Would definitely help me. Thanks, Roman.
No problem.
Anything else on item number 3? All right, so I think we're in good shape. And Meredith, Helen, and Thad, whenever you guys are having your subcommittee meetings, if you just include me on those emails. And if you guys have specific agendas, we should probably go ahead and post those as public meetings. And then that's another good opportunity for the group as a whole to be able to not necessarily participate, but they can at least watch, and then you don't feel the need to have to constantly send up a bunch of emails if you don't want to do that. And then they have that information available to them as well. So we should post those subcommittee meetings, and then we can work on the city side of making sure that they get live streamed so they're accessible to the public. That might also be another piece to your public engagement as well, to see if you can kind of get some feedback from people viewing those meetings as well. So that's just something to think about. So that moves us on back to item number 2, which is the presentation on police procedures. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Major Ed Turner, and I think he is all geared up to provide that presentation.
Oh, hey, before you, Major Turner, you go into your piece, I apologize about interrupting. Do you need anything more from me related to the RFQ process? Because I was getting requested to maybe participate in something else, but I didn't know if we were through talking RFQ.
I think we're good, Rich. I really appreciate you taking your time out this morning to sit with us. And if we have any questions along the way, you can bet that I will be at your office. So.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, Rich.
Be of help.
Thanks,
All right,
Rich.
everybody take care. Bye now.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Hi, Becky. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So sorry I was late last week. Last time I was out of town, and this morning I had an appointment in Kansas, so apologize for that. I appreciate everybody's working on the matter, and I wanted to just kind of give a rundown and of kind of the 8 can't wait and some of those points, and happy to have dialogue on this. I guess just as a baseline, I'm just going to give you some information as we move into it. It's the Bureau of Justice statistics show that their police contacts with citizens over 16 years of age each year is around 54 million people. Police use force in 1.8% of those contacts or those incidences. So just as a rough number, and I could drill into these numbers a little bit more, but just so you know, like we will book around 10, 11, sometimes 12,000 people a year in our jail. So that's actually people we put handcuffs on, we bring into the jail and we book them. That doesn't count everybody we contact in the street. It doesn't count all the tickets we write and things. So we use force. We call it response to force because we're responding to the force that's been presented. We use force maybe 150, 200 times a year. So somewhere around 0.15% to maybe 0.2% of the time. Those are just really, really rough numbers. So if you want me to drill into those, I can. I was just trying to give you a little bit of a sketch of amount of times that we respond, and we're required to respond to some type of force when affecting arrest or fulfilling our obligations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through each one of these. And so if you would like, we can discuss these each one as we go. I'll kind of present where we're at. And I'll start with probably one of them that'll be, I'll just start with one of them that'll probably be more dialogue than others possibly, but I don't know that. So the first I'll bring up is the ban on chokeholds. It's chokeholds and strangleholds. So we use restraining techniques. There's 2 types of restraining techniques that involve the neck. One is actually affects the respiratory, the breathing. The second one is the vascular neck restraint. We've used it's called the lateral vascular neck restraint. Independence has used that for, it's been out for 50 years. In those 50 years, and I've got the citations to back these up. I'm not just making them up, but and I can share that with you another time. But for over 50 years, there has not been any incident of death, serious injury, or litigation attributed to the lateral vascular neck restraint. It differs from a chokehold because it addresses the circulatory and not the airway. There's no obstruction. In fact, it actually protects the airway when it's done correctly. We have a lot of policy against inappropriate use of force. That's all the officers that would use a lateral vascular neck restraint receive a certification continuously throughout their career to properly use it. If they haven't been trained in it, just like a taser or a less lethal weapon, they're not permitted to use that. So, and then just a little more information on that. Like there's quite a bit on it, but I'll just tell you some of the things that we had looked at. I know the Canadian study was done with 5 major force of options used by law enforcement, and just for ease of conversation, we call it the LVNR. So if I hear me say LVNR, I'm referring to the lateral vascular neck restraint, not an airway chokehold. But the LVNR was found in the Canadian study to be the second safest force used in regards to the lack of injury to a suspect. One of the things that we found is smaller framed officers dealing with a larger frame suspect. Oftentimes we always try to have a second officer there, but unfortunately I've seen many times when that doesn't happen. We've had a smaller a male officer or a smaller female officer that is find themselves in a altercation or a fight with a suspect, and they've had to use that technique to help gain control. One of the hurdles too we find, and again I'm not saying that I'm not trying to shut down, I'm just throwing out something. I'm not trying to shut down anybody from having obviously adverse thoughts or comments about it, but I'm just sharing some things that we've found in our study and our practice is that we found that suspects under the influence of drugs or alcohol lack any pain compliance. So our empty hand techniques oftentimes do not work and are ineffective, mainly just because the pain receptors are affected and they don't have the ability to gain control of the subject. So just a little bit further, the circulatory system is obviously doesn't affect the pain receptors, but it gives a way to gain control. In fact, most of the time when I say LVNR, we never even get to a point of applying pressure that affects blood flow. It's the first thing that we do is we take them off center. They're off their balance is pulled backwards, so they're not able to take an offensive fight towards the officer. So generally, we don't even fully apply what would be termed a LVNR. We still document it anytime we encircle anyone with around the neck. That we document that, and I'll elaborate on that just a little bit more as we get down in some of these other points. But so one of the things that would be a concern if the LVNR was banned would be the force incidents potentially could, the actual lethal force could, I'm not saying it would, but there's a potential that it could increase because when you have a smaller officer, they may have to go to a higher level of force, which could be a firearm, instead of using a certified move that would be useful in bringing a situation, the physical threat under control. There's actually, I think it was Channel 5. I'm not sure. I don't know if any of you saw that report done a few weeks ago. They did it. They went up to the Kansas City Academy and they gave it, and the Kansas City gave a demonstration and kind of articulated what is involved in terms of a lateral vascular neck restraint versus an airway chokehold. And I thought it was a pretty good explanation. Of course, I've been around and been certified on the LVNR for 25 years. Again, I've used it. I've seen other people use it. Normally, like I said, rarely do people ever go unconscious, but it is one thing that we have in effect that I'll just bring this up now. It's also later in my notes, but anytime we apply the LVNR now, an ambulance is called. supervisor responds to the scene, pictures are taken, a thorough report is done, not just LVNR, any use of force, these things apply. And this comes up later in one of the bullets that I wanted to touch on as far as reporting out. That report is then the first line sergeant, the supervisor, interviews the officer, pulls any they take pictures of everything, they pull any video from the cars or if any video is available around that, and they review, then they'll review those things that are available to them, and then they write a recommendation that goes up to the captain. The captain does all the same, looks at all the video, looks at all the pictures, reads the reports. The captain will evaluate it, and it'll go up the chain to the major, which is my seat, gets that report. Depends on which division it's coming through. Then I would sign off as a major. Then it goes to the deputy chief. The deputy chief reviews all the reports, the videos and the pictures, and then it goes to the chief, and then the chief reviews it, and he will be the final sign off on that. And from there, it goes over to our internal affairs department, and they take the information, review it, and they put it into a database so we can track what was original contact for, what was the why were we there, was it self-initiated, was a call generated, were there drugs, were there the size of the person, the type, any weapons were used. Again, and that's, I can send you all one of our use of force reports, but that was a flyby, if you will, on that particular bullet. And I can tell you that on the 8 Can't Wait, we're doing majority of these. There's some of them that we'll get into later, like the warning shots and stuff that could have some more could have more discussion. But I think as we dissect this could obviously go on a lot. I wish we were in person. It sure makes it easier for me to have this conversation. But I would kind of just on that first bullet of 8 Can't Wait, I just wanted to take time to get feedback from you and start dialogue on how we might improve, or things that you've heard or would like to know. And I may not have the answer, but I can try to get the answer and get back to you on it.
Meredith made had put a question into the comments. Meredith, did you want to give that to Major Turner directly, or did you just want him to read that? It's a good question.
Oh, thanks, Thad. No, so while you were talking, I was familiar with the LVNR tactic and looked on the National Law Enforcement Training Center website, and it looks like it's usually done standing or kneeling or on the ground, but it's predominantly from behind, using the arms, elbow, and the fist to lock the restraint. Is there ever any approved use of force that involves law enforcement either kneeling or applying any pressure to the neck? I think just generally knowing that this meeting is being publicized, and I know the general public may have some questions or thoughts about that. I think our education is important, because I don't know anything about holds. And so is there any time ever that is a approved use of restraint?
That's a wonderful question. And the answer is like what we saw, where a lot of the stem from, we saw in Minneapolis, that was illegal. That was a criminal act. Now, will I say in the midst of a full fight that you don't spin around, you end up on somebody and your knee slides up, but you immediately reposition? I mean, because of the dynamics of a conflict, you don't always get to end up where you fall on somebody. So, but that doesn't mean you stay there. We do teach a pinning technique with the shin and the lower part of the knee across the shoulder blades that would help hold the person down. But we do not, it's against policy for anyone to use a knee to hold anyone's neck down. And those are dealt with when we watch video. If there anything would come up that's questionable, it might be a training situation where we're saying, hey, maybe another officer there was another officer there. He really maybe somebody need to reposition to get on the other side to help control another arm. But yeah, it's a great question. So yes, I don't know if that answers your question, but we do not permit anyone's knee on the neck as a technique to hold somebody. But I do want to have a caveat to know, to understand that in the midst of a full fight when somebody's grabbing at you, your gun, or hitting at you, that when you spin around, you might end up on their back. And for a moment, you might be in a position where your legs are on that, but that is not allowed to stay when you're going into to handcuffing or control technique, if that makes sense. And I'm not trying to make a window of it out. I'm just being realistic that things happen that way.
No, that was very straightforward. Thank you.
And I would definitely be willing and able to, I don't say this to try to even try to convince you that everything we're doing is right. I would just, in terms of education, to have a greater understanding moving forward, to even have ability to demonstrate that, what that looks like, what is actually taught, and any of the we have all the documents from doctors and all the legal process in terms of the LVNR versus a chokehold. So those are kind of where we're at right now. We don't, if anybody's is doing a LVNR and it repositions to you're not in position to maintain what you're certified to do, then you're not to maintain that position. You're going to have to readdress and try something else. Of course, if it is life-threatening and they have a weapon, then obviously that would rise the level of force, similar to elevating to a firearm. But that, by and large, we find that we generally don't even have to go to putting full pressure on anyone's neck. Once you take them off balance, they generally recognize that they're not able to fight anymore, and they start to comply. But there are those that are intoxicated with PCP, and I can tell you stories of just this really struggle. And I guess just briefly, just so you have an idea, is people don't have their pain receptors are not working. And so we literally have broke people's arm before, trying to just do an arm bar, and they don't even feel that they don't recognize their strength, and they don't feel pain. And so there have been times when those that are on PCP or other types of drugs, stimulants, that it's almost unhuman type strength that you're dealing with, and it's difficult. Again, those aren't excuses. It's not to say that there aren't room for improvement. I'm just mentioning that as an example of times. So what other things have you heard, or questions you have in regards to that, or what would be helpful for you at this point to be in the best position to move forward, if you know that at all? I don't know if you know what you would need to know, if that makes sense, but happy to try to provide whatever that is.
Major Turner, one of my questions would be, once a person is under control and in restraints, how quickly is that person returned from, if they're in a prone position on their stomachs, how quickly does the department get them then from that position either into a sitting position or off their stomachs? Because I know that places a person's respiratory system in distress to be on their stomachs for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, and that's another great question. And I'm sorry, who was asking that?
I'm sorry, this is Helen Hurley.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Yeah, we actually have policy, and I'm willing to share that policy with any of you as well. It's available. It's policy to get a person up once they are secured, and set them upright. We know that positional asphyxiation or excited delirium is something that you can do a little research on that and just type that. And excited delirium, we know that when people are under the influence of stimulus or some type of mind altering drug, or that their hearts can be in a position that are further stressed after a fight, and the adrenaline and their heart rate's up. So it is our policy. If they don't sit them up, they actually, we in our reviews, we actually either do remedial training, or it could move into even a personnel issue, policy issue, a discipline issue if it's not being addressed. So, but yeah, that's a great question too. Does that answer that, Helen?
It did. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that information, Turner. And I just want to make a comment that although the incidents of George Floyd and such are the ones that raise the most attention, is that in regards to the MOU and the purpose of the group is that we were looking at the broad range of scope of police procedures and policies in different ways to incorporate those for more diversity and inclusion. And I know that when we last talked before COVID, is that we were trying to get access to many of the procedures and to figure out a way to have those become electronic and more visible to the public for transparency. Has there been any efforts to that regard? And is that something that we can continue to pick up to move toward as we move through this process?
Oh, sure. I know we have shared all of those policies. What I could do is I shared the policies with the Community Concerned Citizens group. They were in that circle. I thought we gave them out to this group, but if we haven't, we will. But we have a lot of policies. You can look at any policies. My thought would be to give you a list, just a bullet list of all the policy that would just show you what they're about. Give you the ones that are probably going to be the ones that you would be most interested in, and you can have all those. You can have all of them anyways. If electronically, I guess it doesn't matter, but it can be kind of tedious to get through a lot of some of the policy. It could be something about just putting property in, or how do you secure something. And again, not that you can't have any of them, but just I can pick out the ones that I know that we get requested on the most and give those out, and then a complete list. However you want to do that, you let me know what you want and we can make it happen.
I believe the last time we discussed is that because I looked at Kansas City's with Rebecca, and they actually have a way to where all the procedures are available online. And I think that would be a good end goal at the end of the process, to have those be available for transparency purposes. So yes, giving those to the group, that would be key. And I believe that you suggested the same thing last time. I just want to keep in mind a larger vision of making those accessible for the public, those who aren't familiar with our policies or even how to get them, just to make those easily accessible. And so that is kind of my focus in this. And so if we can make steps toward that reality, I think that would serve the most benefit to the public.
Sure thing. No problem. I know I encourage you to, if something comes to you on that first bullet, in regards to 2 different types of neck restraints that I addressed, please feel free to come chime back in and let me know if something comes to you. No question. I want you also feel comfortable. I think most of you, you're not going to offend me if you say something that's challenging. I may or may not like it. Doesn't matter if I like it. If you have a question, I'd rather you ask it so we can put it out there and just have dialogue on it. And so, we don't do everything right, but we're working to work with everybody so we can do what we need to do to, like Roman said, share these things, whatever we can do to help that communication.
Who's talking? Dad, you can go.
You can go. It's okay.
When you said that after one of those holds was used, then a ambulance is called and then a supervisor comes. My internet was cutting out a little bit, so I may have missed this. But if the person is in distress, are officers required to render aid until that emergency services gets there? Does that make sense? If
Yeah.
they started to have issues.
A medical emergency.
Yes. Is that expected of the officers to render that until, I mean, which is probably very rare, but until the emergency services do get there?
Yeah, in fact, it's more than it's required. It's in policy that when that happens, we are required. If they don't, then they're out of policy and they're subject to discipline. And so that is a mandate, if you will. So that's another good. You'll have some good questions, and hopefully that that can be relayed in ways that understand that. In fact, that happens a lot. Officers, and I say a lot. I know you said it doesn't happen very often, and but it happens. It can happen several times a year where you're having to now deal with somebody that's having a possible medical emergency or something. And I don't have the numbers. I say several. I don't know, maybe a few times. But where you're getting involved, and you immediately turn from being assaulted, handcuffing, and then you're giving first aid to the person, and sometimes it involves that person. Even we've had times when we've had to use lethal force on people, and they just tried to hurt the officer, and they had to use lethal force, and now you've got their blood all over you because you're trying to save them, and it just escalated so fast. So so it is mandated that they reply with medical care until a higher level arrives. They treat them. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And so for me, and that gave a little bit of answer to it. But so I guess the only reason I'm giving this is that should anybody in the public be seeing this, and I think a lot of concern that I see in all the in the movement and everything. So when all policy and procedures have failed, and there's in that very, very, very small percentage, and something like George Floyd happens in the city of Independence, and because an officer went rogue and had a bad day, I don't know, but disciplinary actions. How does the Independence enforce disciplinary actions for officers who aren't following the policy and procedure?
Sure. So I tell officers this when they come on new, or even maybe they've been there a while, is that you and we can't drive down the road without violating a law somewhere. We got stacks of ordinances and laws on the books, and things happen. And I think one of our old chiefs may have said it best. There's times it's kind of like so I guess what I'm saying, there are gonna be some policy violations from time to time, whether it's they didn't turn one, like for example, and this is a very minor one, somebody jumps out of their car and they didn't have their mic pack synced, meaning it's not connected to the system that's recording the audio. So we don't know what was said. Well, that's a problem. Well, that might not rise to a critical discipline, but it may be capturing pieces, I think, that are relevant, it's mandatory that they have their mic packs on. So something minor like that is dealt with, might start with a verbal reprimand saying, or verbal counseling saying, hey, your mic pack's off. You need to make sure you have it charged, or you need to have it synced, or you need to have it on. Sometimes there are technical issues that happen that the system just will have to reset, and then it doesn't reconnect. But sometimes it could be officers because of their operation of the system. So I guess, and then we have times that if it's elevated to a point that it's abuse of someone's civil liberties or excessive force, they are fired. I don't, not to air dirty laundry, but we had that happen last year where there was an issue that arose that caused concern, but the officer basically was terminated because of their actions, and they filed a grievance, and it went through a grievance procedure, and the city withheld that decision to terminate that officer because of decisions. That wasn't even an excessive force type of situation that was documented, but it was something that went beyond the scope of the expectation that we have for officers in service to the community. And I don't know if I'm getting to your point, Thad, and if I'm not, you can refocus me, but basically it just varies depending on the seriousness of the offense, on what has transpired. But if, we use somewhat of a, would be called a progressive discipline, where if it's a minor issue, you're just going to do a verbal, say, hey, let's not do that next time. It's, I told you last time, this is last time. If it's something real minor, we're not going to do that again. And then it might go on paper. That might escalate sooner depending on the nature of the offense. And I don't know if that helps any, Thad, or if that made it worse.
No, it does. It's just, I think it was more important just to have this conversation, and especially when we're seeing things like Breonna Taylor, and just a lack of accountability for officers sometimes. I think that's important that public people know that, at least because we're coming from the reference of the City of Independence, that the City of Independence has accountability for officers. And I think that's the point I was trying to make, just to let that, people hear that there is an accountability for the City of Independence and the officers.
And can I ask you something, Ed? Only because my computer turned off. I'm just coming back to the conversation. So let me know if it's repetitive.
You want me to start over, Nina? That's what I'm hearing.
I know. And the horrible cheap computers, what can I say? I argued about it already. I wanted to ask this, like Breonna Taylor and the two young ladies and their children the other day. Those were both mistakes. The young lady that was on TV the other day, her and her sister and their children, for a stolen car. Now, and I understand why they were pulled over. And I've been pulled over many times in Independence, but not any longer, like I said. But it was the exact license plate number, exactly. But the stolen car was from another state. So it's a mistake. But with that mistake, all of the children were, and they didn't know it was a mistake, of course, but for a stolen car, all the children were put on the ground, 8-year-olds too, in handcuffs, face down on the hot heat pavement, and the two young ladies, and they're all African American. And this would be my question is, I know mistakes happen, but like with children, is there a protocol for children? Is there a protocol, a no-knock warrants? Do we do those? The little things could be tweaked a little so they wouldn't happen. Breonna Taylor just did not have to happen. That was horrible, to go into her house in the middle of the night. If anybody comes in my house in the middle of the night, if I can't get to something, something's going to happen. That was one of the most horrible, but seeing those little children on that heated path, and this was a mistake again, but a legitimate mistake, same exact, but different state. How can in Independence we respect people a little bit more level wise? Do we do no knocks that come into people's houses at night? And also, if there's some 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds, are we going to put them on the ground? Ed, what I'm saying, because I know you wouldn't want your children or my grandchildren on the ground face down in the heat. I feel like the answer is we don't do any of that, but could you let me know? I just like basic scenarios. I'm a scenario person. Could you, do that one for me, Ed?
Yeah, so I pulled a couple different things out of what you're saying. So we do utilize no-knock warrants on whenever necessary. Now those are approved. We don't get to pick that. Those are approved by the judge. The prosecutor and the judge have to sign off on those, based on the information that is relevant. So we just had a no-knock warrant 2 weeks ago. They're rare. They do happen, but we have people that are armed with guns. We had a guy with and I may not get I'm trying to remember. I'm not in investigations, and so I don't always get all the details of all the nuances that lead up to getting the warrant, but I get briefed on them. We had a homicide suspect that out of another state, and they're in town, and then we know they've got multiple guns, and all of our people say they carry a gun on them, and they're going to have it on them when you get them. And they made all, and then we get statements from other people saying this is what he said is going to happen if the police come, and he's articulated this to other people. And again, all those scenarios are different, but we take the information we get and we put it in a report and we send it to the prosecutor to get them to approve a warrant, and they would have to do the no-knock exemption for that. We don't get to pick that. Okay. We may ask for it because we know that when we go in that they're going to have the upper hand by sitting at the door, knocking and waiting a reasonable amount of time for somebody to come to the door because of the nature of the violence, which they've already demonstrated. But no knocks are rare, very rare. I could go get to the numbers and tell you how many of them we do, but if we do one a year, maybe a couple a year, I don't know. I shouldn't even say a number. We do some each year, but by and large, most of them are knock and announce warrants. And
you have checks and balances.
Well, yeah, we
Okay.
we don't get to pick those. The prosecutor has to recognize the need for it. Then they would give an endorsement, and it would go to the judge, and the judge would see it, and he would sign off. Okay, I see this person's record. I see they've had this lengthy violent history, so I can see the need not to be standing outside waiting for this person that's already killed somebody and known to be armed to. And again, all those situations are different. I'm just telling you the one that happened a couple of weeks ago.
And that's so reasonable. I'm a reasonable person, but I'd like checks and balances, and that was the wrong address. And so that's always going to stand out on my mind. And then so many Black men and women getting shot, for cigarettes. They stole a cigarette. And I know you're a thoughtful person, so you're the person I need to say that's just not acceptable. And that's why I kind of like to know, what's going on.
I can't tell you what the precipice of what initiated the contact with police. Mm-hmm. It's the actions of the person that stems into what the disposition is going to be. I mean, the police don't show up and initiate, lethal force. Something has initiated that contact has gone bad. And we can get into de-escalation. That's the next one on here. But ultimately, our goal is to de-escalate. We have training in that throughout everyone's career. We are trained on, particularly, we have had that in a CIT, which is a critical incident team, deals with mentally disturbed mental health issues. And as we are trained on dealing with those, the same principles apply. It's I kind of call it time, distance, and shielding. If we can give time to something, if that's allotted, meaning if we have dialogue with somebody, that's a good thing. I often ask this question. I'll ask it to any of you. Do you all know what the acronym SWAT stands for? Anybody know?
No.
Well, it actually originally it stood for Special Weapons and Tactics. But after being involved with the SWAT team for over 20 years, different roles, it really means sit, wait, and talk. So when we go in, somebody's barricaded in a house, negotiators are doing all the work. We're just there in case it doesn't go well, or they start to use violence, or they try to use force on somebody. I kind of make light of that, but quite honestly, that's a lot of what we do. We sit, wait, and talk, and but sometimes the situation doesn't allow that because of what's being presented, and we can only go off the information we're given. For example, we could have somebody that says, I have somebody in here, and I'm gonna take their life at a certain time, or something similar to a hostage situation, or then we don't like those situations because we now have to weigh. My litmus test is, if that is my daughter in that house, what would I want the police to do to save their life? And if it was good for my child, then I'm going to have to respond. And they may not. They may be it may be a bluff. It may be something they're just saying just to hold us at bay. But and they don't understand that dials it up in terms that we now have trying to protect somebody's life. Again, those things are very rare, and so that's not. I mentioned that not like it's a common thing, but basically to say that although time, distance, and shielding, or time, distance, and cover position, meaning protection from a threat from a suspect, is good, but a lot of times those might be taken away from us because of the nature of the situation that's presented. And we find that we're in the middle of a road as a car is driving at us, and you respond because there's no way to get out of, there's no time, you don't have the distance to move, and there's no cover to get away from that, and so you respond. Anyway, so if you want, I can kind of work through these other bullets. I'm sorry I'm taking so much time. Hopefully some useful dialogue. And let me, Nina, before I forget, I wanted to talk about, you talked about proning. We call it proning, meaning laying prone on the ground when it's hot. I can't speak to the situation that you're talking about. I haven't seen that video. I just got back. Yesterday is my first day back, and so I was out of town.
And you got me. I feel sorry for you.
Not making excuses. I just can't speak on what you're speaking about. Happy to look at it and have dialogue about it after I see it. But there's oftentimes we put people in a position that we have them in a submissive position, meaning we may have too many people to handcuff, but we have a car, or we have a vehicle, or we have a house or something that has a possible threat in it. So in turn, we try to get people in a non-threatening position so we can deal with the other threats, because we haven't had time to secure the threats that are there. And sometimes actually lying a child down, again, I can't speak to the issue at hand, is if something happens, they're out of the way. If something rises up and the officers have to use some type of force, or they have a better, clearer view that a child's now not in danger between a threat area and what they're dealing with. And so again, I'm sorry I can't speak to the issue at hand, but we've had issues where we come around May or so, we had our cars are black and they're running all day, and just putting somebody's hands on the car can be an issue. Normally we put them there because for police officers, we watch their hands. We know hands are areas that somebody wants to bring harm to us. It's likely going to stem from their hands. So if we have their weight they're bearing their weight with their hands, or their hands are seen, then we feel like we have a better situational awareness that at least their hands don't have a weapon in them. But to your point, is at times, even in the summertime, we have to watch putting their hands on the cars for any long period of time because it is hot. So we try to respond to that, and the same with asphalt. So those are things that we do. I don't know. I just wanted to touch base on that. I wasn't trying to skip over that, but happy to talk more about it. Okay, so let me run through these other ones, and then we can keep talking. So the second one was required de-escalation. I kind of already alluded to that with our mental health protocols and the things that we do with our CIT officers. I will say that oftentimes, and I again alluded to this, that situations don't provide opportunity for us to fully de-escalate because of the nature of someone's aggressive. And I can show you a video of our officers that somebody jumped out of a car on multiple occasions and started shooting at the officer. Well, I mean, obviously there's no de-escalation of that. You're already in a lethal force situation. So, but at times, when you deal with those people that are in crisis, mental health crisis, or it could be training on domestic violence. For example, we know that when we arrive, and if the lady had been getting abused, there's a circle of violence, and I won't try to get into all of it, but you're going to show up and say, for example, say the male is the one that was the aggressor, and the wife was the victim. She's going to be irate and out of control and blowing up, and he's going to be calm. This isn't the case all the time, but this is likely can happen. Well, she can look like she's out of control to the point that, and we're trying to de-escalate those situations just so we can get the investigation underway. So officers are de-escalation is something that we have officers do, and it's really necessary for us to do our job. And were there any particular points on de-escalation that you thought that you've heard or seen or wanted to touch base on, Casey?
Yes. With de-escalation, I've experienced with a neighbor that it wasn't used very well, and he was having a mental health crisis. And when we had called the police, we told the dispatcher that kind of a well check, and that to expect that it was a mental health issue, most likely. My husband works in that field, and they actually use de-escalating a lot because they don't have any type of weapons or anything to help them, but they deal with clients sometimes that are very volatile and aggressive because of various different things. So anyways, how I know that that officers are being trained with CIT training, but is it, I feel like, what is the status with the police and CIT and having mental health, maybe other organizations helping out with some of these situations? Because I feel, it seems like there isn't enough in that help that with the mental health area for police officers to actually utilize those things, because there's just, it's, you know, that there's just, I don't know if there's not enough funding, if there's not enough actual CIT officers, like at nighttime. It feels like it should be a way that the police officers are going, but it seems like we're not there yet where it's being utilized as much as it could be. And I don't know if that's lack of funding, lack of, you know, whatever.
Yeah, and I know there's others on this call, on our meeting here, that could probably speak to this too, but we have we work hand in hand with a comprehensive mental health. We partner with them and they partner with us. So they have one of their employees that is embedded with the police department. It's called a co-responder. A lot of times we try to bring Heather into it because that's her job. She tries to take some of the burden off of, you know, the mental health crisis, and because we know that when we can get them into services sooner, then we can reduce the call. And I can give you an example. We had some years back, 4 or 5 years ago, we had a person that had, I think they were in the range of, it was something like 400 calls for the year. And it's just an amazing number. And every time you have a call, that's 2 police officers. And on numerous times, there's an ambulance and a fire truck going. Don't think about how many resources get tied up in that. And I don't mean to get off track here, and so with the co-responder, you know, we found that, well, we didn't have co-responder then, but we have a CIT officer that's dedicated, that's their full-time job. And then they work with the other officers, but we can reduce that. And the next year, I think we had 2 or 3 calls with them because we get them into services. So I think that's why our co-responder is so important. We've just applied for a grant and with Mark, and we're in the process of getting a second co-responder. So we could use an army of co-responders probably, but unfortunately, a lot of those situations are going to require us to go first, and they may come in behind us or with us and try to resolve that so that we're not going back there time and time again. But yeah, and some of it's a funding issue, and it's a treatment issue, trying to get the resources in line so that people do not, and they're not always going to go right, you know, like you said. I mean, it just, unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't go as well as we'd like. But those are the areas that we try to build on when we know about them and get better because of it. So,
do you know, as citizens, how would we help support or campaign for that for the officers so that they would have that type of, like, I mean, do we you know, I mean, is there organizations that we would support or encourage or reach out to say that this is something that we would like our police officers to have more access to? Is it something that we, you know, email the chief about? I mean, who would we, as citizens, show that that's what we would like for our police officers to have as a tool? Do you have any ideas on that?
So really, from my perspective, it's a federal issue. There's going to have to be some federal initiative to get the support to the local communities. You know, I guess you could petition the state. I think Julie Pratt, who oversees comprehensive mental health, she's my go-to, and she knows all the right strings to pull to get what she can. And even then, we're just looking for support at higher levels to have the funding in place to respond to the needs of the community. And there are a lot of mental health, and our homeless, our community service officers do a lot with the homeless outreach, and a lot of those issues end up, there's overlapping issues in their life that have to deal with mental health, mental illness. So, but yeah, I would start working. It's going to be there's no immediate money, there's no local money. Now the hospitals have, there is the Ford Foundation, that may be getting that wrong. There's some funding out there through the hospital foundation that they've tapped into. But again, I don't know if that helps any.
Thank you.
Yep.
I did have one question, Turner, in regards to, let's say an officer does get convicted, and there are suits, I guess, against the officer. What is the city's current position in regards to, I guess, abuse of power, or let's say like with the George Floyd incident, where there are punitive damages that are sought by the family? Is the city on the hook for those, or is the officer held liable for paying those back?
So when you said when they're convicted, are you talking about civil or criminal type of charge? Or
I guess it would be either while being in the line of duty.
So yeah, so if they're outside of policy, they could be subject to we've had that happen. I've been a commander, and I've had to testify in federal court in a civil rights violation and testify against the officer. And that's nothing that, we'd like to do, but there are times that they exceed the scope of what's allowed. But I know that if they're within policy, and then the city's going to support their role in what transpired. So the city's going to be involved in those civil, regardless of what happens anyways, but they're going to have a piece of that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, where's my
So I touched on this earlier. And the number 3 I have is requiring a warning shot before. Many times officers are giving multiple commands to the person. The only organization, I say reputable, the only known organization that policies are drawn from that has come out and supported warning shots is PERF. But it is a organization that helps. And we work a lot with International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's called the IACP, but we also recognize that, again, going back, the situations are so fluid that there's times you don't have time to do something like a warning shot. It's not in our policy to give a warning shot. And for example, there's an organization called 4 Science that studies how force is used and the response to force. And one example they give was a person with a firearm can draw from a console area and have it pointed at the officers in 0.15 seconds, and it would take the officer 0.25 seconds to even respond. And obviously in those quick instances, there's not the opportunity to, but it does go back to the de-escalation, that if we try to dialogue, even if I can tell you time and time and time again, multiple times each year, dozens of times, officers will have somebody with a weapon, gun, or a knife, and they're trying to dialogue with them and to resolve the issue. But again, warning shot is something that is not something that is in our policy. But I don't know if you all had thoughts on that. Of course, we have less lethal weapons like a taser and a beanbag. That would be another options that we would use, or some type of chemical munition like pepper spray that they carry on their holster. But we don't have warning shots. Does anybody have any thoughts on warning shots, or we can come back to it if you think of something?
I do know that, I guess, wasn't there a while back where officers were trained to keep their finger off the trigger to allow, I guess, more time, that extra split second to think about a shot? And then what are other non-lethal approaches, whether it's a warning shot or something like that could procedurally be put in place to, I guess, hold the officers accountable, but to actually change the procedure and how police deal with those particular incidences where there is time to actually provide a warning shot or a non-lethal approach, as opposed to lethal approaches to dealing with that.
So what was the first part of that question again? I had something and then I got sidetracked. If you could.
I know from my understanding there was, I guess, training in the past to have officers keep the finger off the trigger, but are there any other procedural things in place that could be put in place in regards to use of non-lethal force or warning shot or something like that?
I think we do not train to put your finger on the trigger. In fact, there's 4 cardinal rules of firearm safety, and they have to. Sometimes our firearms training officer, have them repeat that every time they go to the range. But one of those safety rules is you never put your finger inside the trigger guard or on the trigger until you are ready to fire. And so, because we have what's called sympathetic squeeze, and this is probably more technical than you care to know, but if I had my finger on the trigger with my right hand and I reach and grab something quick with my left hand, you have a sympathetic squeeze that happens in our body sometimes, where you actually are squeezing the other hand because there's so much initiative on the other side, and so it would be I'll say a range safety violation if a range officer sees somebody on the firearms course with their finger on the trigger when they're not ready to fire. Again, that's just, so there is a reactionary time there that happens. But again, I can tell you from my personal experience, I've had a guy wanting us to kill him, and it was dark, and we were in the back of a house, and if I wasn't behind a welding truck where I felt I had good cover in some distance, I may have fired. I started putting the finger on the trigger, and I thought I was going to have to shoot him because he would reach in his pocket and pull something out real quick and point it at us, and trying to get us to be a comb, or you get a cell phone, and he was trying to get us to kill him, and we're trying not to. And just to end that part of the story, we were able to distract him one side while somebody else came up and tackled him from the back where he didn't see him coming. So I guess to answer that last part of that question, Roman, is that I think when we can have more officers there, we have the ability to use different techniques to try to mitigate the situation, so we don't have to use lethal force, because it's called divided attention, and they can only focus on one person at a time. So if one person can try to get them in custody while they're focused on the other person. I mean, that doesn't happen a lot, but I mean, I know it happens from personal experience that if you have more than one person there, the ability for you to have a better response is going to be likely going to be the outcome.
Yeah, can I ask you
all that? Go ahead, Nina.
You know, I like being proactive, and this is a pie in the sky type thing. And I've always thought about it and talked about it. When people leave, the best thing I think to do is have less people that have a need to go, you know, to jail, whether they're on drugs, whether they need money to feed their families or whatever. And do we have anything in place that I always said it should be a sheet or something, or they have to contact, you know, someone that's not a hardened criminal going, you know, to jail, I guess, for 100 years, where they can contact people like Helen. They can contact people, you know, about food or whatever. Give people some hope instead of keep redoing things. I do believe in America that people of color are targeted because of whatever's perceived on the TV, which is not true, you know. But I think in Independence, we're unique because we listen to each other. And I would like us to be the one to stop a lot of things. And it does, as much doesn't happen in Independence, I admit, but I'm not saying that they can't, because I talk to people that like me, that they said, but Black people do cause a lot of crime. So it's a lot of misinformation out there why and things happen. So Ed, is there something out there like a piece of paper that you take to, you have to talk to Helen Hurley, you have to talk to this person, you have to, so you won't escalate into the person we kill later. And it has a lot to do with poorness here in Independence. I believe that I used to be targeted when I first got here 30 years ago, but now I believe, along with being targeted for other things, whether people admit it or not, if you are poor and you look like you're going to do something and you look, that's the new targeted population too. It's like everybody's about to fall into this. And I just want to be proactive, Ed. Can you have like 3 people at, you know, you have talk with the police when you get out, where 3 people come and talk why they that, you know, can we do things that may not cost as much as we think to help people not give you a problem so you won't give me a problem? You know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I guess one thing I mean, from my seat, and I don't say this as a roadblock so much, but I don't know what leverage we would have to get people to talk. You know, I don't know how we bring people to the table. I mean, yeah, we can present all kinds of stuff. We present stuff now. We give them the first step. Somebody on drugs, we try to get them off drugs. We give them first step card. We say, hey, call this number and get some help. You know, and to speak to your earlier part of what you're speaking of was, you know, we've had officers that go to, you know, Price Chopper or Hy-Vee will have somebody in custody because they're stealing a bunch of meat or something, and then they get there and they find out the mom trying to feed their kids, and the officers will pay for the food and get it. Now that doesn't happen every day, I'm not gonna say, but I mean, there's times that, I mean, officers have paid because a lady was domestic violence and she was trying to get shelter and she had 2 flat tires, and he went and put tires on her car, and you know, so she would have tires. And so there's times, you know, I think there's plenty of times of mercy, and there's times of grace and goodwill that unfortunately those are never known about. And I'm not trying to bring them up here as if like we've got it all figured out. I know that, I think what you're saying, pie in the sky, is that are there other avenues besides taking people to jail? And you know, the one thing is, if you're the victim, we still are working for the victim too. I mean, they have rights and they want their day in court. They want either you know, some type of response to this person's held accountable. And although there may be times that it might be a violation that you don't have a victim, where officers use discretion, but sometimes if a victim says, I want to file charges, we're filing charges, and we're going to have a lot less sway in the terms of what the outcome is on that.
And I believe in filing charges. I believe in victims because, you know, you're still a victim even if someone, you know, chokes you and kills you. So I believe in victims. But I'm saying after the fact, after they're charged or whatever, can't people be forced to do the right thing? Like, you have to talk to Helen Hurley. You have to talk to this. You know, I'm thinking, trying to think out of the box. I want change. I don't just want to keep blaming each other for doing something wrong. I kind of want change to happen before I die in independence.
And quite honestly, that's all on the judicial side. When we arrest somebody, we just take the information we have in a report and any evidence, and we send it to the prosecutor and the judge, and we're pretty much done besides testifying in that. And then if there's going to be follow-up, for example, like for domestic violence or other crimes of aggression or violence, they'll send them to anger management classes. It happens a lot with the youth too, through youth court. But the courts really are the ones that are going to have to petition that to happen. Our ability to have leverage, you know, you can make it part of their sentencing is, you know, the courts would have to say, you need to go complete this class, or you need to go talk to Helen, you need to go do this or that. And when you bring back the certificate, then you're not gonna have to, you know, pay the fine, or you're gonna have to,
or get a felony on your record that you don't need, because then you're really gonna be stealing and doing stuff, you know, or just, you know, you're hopeless. But that's where I'm getting at. I don't expect the police to do everything. I want us all to think out of the box. Like the next time you see a judge, you know, some crazy lady that lives in Independence say, can we find a way that we can do this? I just want to think not just present problems as we do this process. And I know Meredith, Casey, and Helen, and everybody on here, Thad, definitely, Jennifer. I want to be more thoughtful about the future, not just, you know, putting Band-Aids. And I just want to be thoughtful in other areas too. And I've thought about this for years, and I've asked people and say, well, we don't have enough money, or so we need to talk to judicial people too in this process. Because, you know, I appreciate the police, but if y'all get on my bad side, you know, but I appreciate, you know, I care about you.
You need to stay off that tall, skinny pedal on the right. Just stay on the left.
But, you know, I expect a lot, you know, out of human beings. That's all.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
No, I appreciate your desire to be a part of change. And I agree. I just, you know, a lot of that, we don't have the leverage to get people where they can best receive the help that would probably be useful.
One quick comment
yes.
to this point, and to Major Turner, your point, just a matter of saying, I think we can't overstate what a great balance and mix of people we have with this task force, with the history of work that's been done up to this point. But and not even a caution, just I think we need to continue to embrace, as Nina said, that independence is uniquely different than even our counterparts to the West and other areas. And personally, having had an experience with a law enforcement agency this year involving my daughter with a detainment, and the experience being very different than what I know to be true with my leadership interactions and relationships out here, and looking for a level of diplomacy and transparency and communication, even just to respond to questions, and wasn't getting it. I can see how there is a mixed bag, if you will, of experiences in trying to do this work with law enforcement. But I think what we have to remember as we go forward with our work is there is a great variety of people that are going to make this work. I call them the kind of like the outer circle trailblazers. They're going to be people, and I hope I don't embarrass them, but I love Thad's energy and Helen's energy, those folks that are going to hold feet to the fire, you know, request accountability, act for policy change, Casey included. And then there are others who want to sit at the table and have conversation and let me give you my eyes and I'll take yours kind of thing. And to Nina's point, you know, I think what happens is law enforcement right now finds themselves, we have just kind of unloaded everything. We need you to be the therapist, the connector, the referral person, and you need to have great judgment and do X, Y, Z. We're creating, I think, a framework here in Independence where we are starting to talk more and give eyes and history and understanding where we haven't had it in a long time. And that's the frame that we need to build on. I know that IPD has broad shoulders. They're taking all of this data, this information, the comparisons to other jurisdictions and other events. And I appreciate Chief Halsey and their leadership. They're not deflecting, they're going through their policies, they're answering, they're responding. And some of our data is not apples to apples to what's happening in Kansas City or in other places. So I think Nina's point is good. I think we can continue to get to change if we keep this dynamic where we're building those longer tables and having this collaborative discussion. Yes, we need to keep accountability. Yes, we need to have more transparency. But remember, we have not, historically, recently at least, had the same level of encounters that we've had in some of our locations to the west and other places. And I just think we're building a new dynamic with law enforcement that you don't see in the region. And I would never want us to get too far away from that. So I'm off of my soapbox, but just having had a personal experience, not even 20 miles away, it is uniquely different. So what Independence, I think, is doing here, especially the police department, is they have our attention, and we have a microphone with them. I just want us to be equitable in how we offer to be a part of that change, and making sure we're not asking just one entity to carry the sole load, if that makes sense.
Well, and if I can borrow your soapbox for a moment, I think, you know, a lot of these issues are dealt with the kids when they're young. I mean, not saying that it's their fault, that we got plenty of room for improvement, but building those relationships young with the youth, and Nina, to your point, this sometimes can be pie in the sky for us. I mean, as much as I love doing that, but you're chasing all the needs, all the homeless needs, all the mental health needs, and again, and these aren't excuses. Please don't take them that way, but because when somebody needs something, they call the police, and we're happy to do what we can. You know, I got 4 parking complaint issues on my phone when I come back. Those are part of what we do, and we farm them out. We go deal them, and everybody wants. Some of them are on private property, some of them are in the street, and we have to figure out who handles what from the city. But so I guess the point is, I think so much of this happens in the youth, and you're talking, and I don't know if it's Nina, maybe been you, somebody said about the misinformation going out is, I mean, I would also say the misinformation about law enforcement, you know, that's out there, that the police are going to kill you, or police are going to hurt you. And what do I do if the police stop me? And I guess something that took me back, and I don't know, Meredith, you were in that meeting, but a couple ladies in one of our other groups had made mention that they were approached by some young kids that they work with, and the question was asked, well, should I be scared of the police, or what should I do? And they didn't know what to tell them, and that was concerning to me, that they don't know what to say, because I understand the question, I understand but I also would like people to draw on their own personal experience, on what they know to be true, not what gets portrayed by different outlets. And so that educational piece by the police department, I think one of our best advocates in the police department are school resource officers, to be able to connect with kids at a younger age, just let them know that we're just people, and that, you know, you don't have to be scared of the police. You should be concerned if you're violating the law. I mean, should be some, not scared, but just saying, hey, yeah, there's an expectation here. But, and so I guess my whole point on that was just saying that we use those avenues, and I'm looking for input from this group and any group I sit with in the community on how we can unite with the youth in ways that they don't have to feel threatened by the things they hear, or even the things they see. Again, not saying that I'm not going to stand and say that police do it right all the time. And just like Meredith, your experience was that, you know, I struggle with this. A lot of times officers get so busy on the road, they forget that they're an ambassador for the police department. Every contact, I used to teach an ethics class quite a few years ago, probably 12 or so years ago at the police department. And one of the things that came to me was, I can remember, and I've asked you this, do you remember the first time you were ever stopped by a police officer? I mean, I think most of you, if you've been stopped, you can say, you can recall, I remember most everything about that situation. But for a police officer, it was just another stop. I mean, quite on that, they do it all the time and they don't realize the impact they have on somebody's life, that how that person's going to always remember that contact and how important that contact is. For an officer, you're kind of, you get complacency in terms of what impact you have in the lives of the people. So anyway, sorry, you can have your soapbox back. I didn't mean to get sidetracked, but that's a great point, Meredith, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I don't know if that stirred anybody's thoughts or anything you wanted to feed off of, but do you want me to keep going through these? We're getting halfway. Does that sound good?
To jump in real quick, Major Turner, since we are almost at the 12 o'clock time spot, we can continue to keep going. We may have to consider maybe breaking this up into two parts. I think we're having really good invoking conversation and dialogue, and I think it's important, but we probably don't want to run over a 3-hour meeting. So just keeping those kind of timelines in mind, I think if we start coming up across the 1 o'clock mark, we might want to have some discussions. I have a few more things to provide to the group before we close for the day. But I mean, I think, like I said, once we start coming up against 1 o'clock, we might want to talk about maybe breaking this into 2 sessions.
Okay, is that okay with everybody else, or are you all good with that, or does anybody need to take off?
I will have to likely leave it
Thad, you have to go
at noon, like noon 15. I should be good.
Well, I can try to hit a couple of these, and I don't know, Becky, if you have stuff that you need to get with that on, or do you want me to stop here or just touch base on a couple more of these? And there's not as much dialogue on most of the rest of them, but they're from my end.
You can go ahead with your presentation, and anything that Thad misses, I'll regroup with you, Thad, for the things that I need to discuss with the group afterwards.
Major Turner, before you go to the next point real quick, and I apologize if you covered it in earlier meetings that I missed, as we're talking about kind of comparing independence against some of these other municipalities and these bullets that you're working through, it would be so nice, at least for me, to see maybe even just in the last quarter in 2020, these incident reports or occurrences, whether it be by complaint or whether we have stops where anything other than a peaceful hold was made. Like, where can we actually see data to see the policies that you say IPD abides by? You can tell in our numbers, there's just been a shift since such and such took the helm. Or can we get raw data? Is that accessible to the public anywhere where we can just see for ourselves in terms of stops and detainments and those things that might get along the lines of civil rights issues or race relations issues or that kind of thing?
So if I'm hearing you right, the Attorney General's office gets all of our numbers and they review all our numbers, and we have to, then they request us to do a report on those numbers if there's any variances in terms of people that are stopped because there may be a higher race that stopped based on our what the population is in the community. So the Attorney General's office has those numbers. I can give those numbers out, the same numbers that we send to the Attorney General's office comes back, either way. And I don't know if that's really what you're looking for is when you're talking about stops and the ratio of minorities, or is that what you're kind of looking for?
Are they broken up by demographically?
Yes. Well, yeah, they are.
What's the format of that? Is that a PDF thing? What is that? And how far does it go back? I mean, is that a monthly report? How often is that generated?
It's a yearly report. It's an annual.
I'm sure it's large and massive, but just for my own awareness, if we're talking about being accountable and holding accountability going forward, I'd love to see that for 2019.
Yeah, so yeah, that's really common. In fact, you may even be on our website. I've talked to John Syme, our PIO, and I think he may have posted it. I don't know. If not, I know I've sent it out to community concerned citizens. I think we'd sent it out. And Becky, have we sent that at all to you, or have we sent anything to this group? I don't remember. Or have we sent those? I know we sent policies out to, I can't remember if this group was involved in that, but.
I recall seeing the list of policies, and I thought we sent it out to this group, but we might just
I'll resend it. Yeah.
get it in everybody's email freshly. If we haven't sent it out, maybe we can kind of just do another email push with some of the things that they're requesting in this group. That way it's all in maybe one combined email, so it's easily accessible by everyone in this group.
Yeah, sure, that would be good. Well, thanks for bringing that up, Meredith. We'll work on getting that out. So we also have number 5 on my list here is the duty to intervene, and we kind of touched based on it, but we didn't get into it. In all aspects of the training, I know that the Independence Police Department, we stress the concept of using effective force when officers are using force, that we monitor that and help to focus our effort to intervene whenever those situations arise. So an officer, I can tell you from the first day of training in the police academy, what is trained and what is transpired and what is how this is handled is, if you are present when something inappropriate or against policy or against law is occurring, this is what we tell all police officers: if you're there, then you might as well be doing it yourself, because if you're, that's just the way. Again, doesn't mean when we look at the issue up in Minneapolis, doesn't mean that the officers always respond that way, but that would be an issue that would be taken up on a case-by-case basis if you see something that is dealt with, and I've had to deal with that, when you, of course, you deal with those as they come up, and where you pull somebody in and you question, when you watch a video, what was seen and when was seen, and how do you best respond to that. So I know as far as a duty to intervene, I know I've seen that's something that's an expectation that's taught from first day of use of response to force training in the police academy. So I don't know, what have you all heard or seen, or what are your thoughts on the duty to intervene that would be helpful for you to discuss? If you've seen anything. If you don't know right now, it's okay too, but if something that you come across, I'd be happy to take a look at it. And see, I was going to look at, we constantly review our policies and try to evaluate. I was thinking and even since this, we've gone back through again and gone through, and so the policy I'll send you would be the latest one, but there's always we have working copies that once we get them refined, then we upgrade, and then we upgrade when we alter anything, then we send it back out to the entire police department, and everybody has to sign off on it, and then it's just to show that they've read it and signed off they've read it. So let me move down to number 6, is to ban shooting at moving vehicles. Our policy already addresses this, the shooting of vehicles. Basically, it says discharging a firearm at or from a moving vehicle is authorized only when any person is in imminent danger of serious physical injury, and all other reasonable means of defense have been exhausted or are not available. And then number 2 would be any occupant of the suspect vehicle is using or threatening to use deadly force by means other than the vehicle, thus creating an imminent danger of serious physical injury. And so shooting at a moving vehicle is very dangerous, and we recognize that. I will tell you that things that we do have to take in consideration was from, I've got several cases here documented from 2006 through May of 2020, where vehicles were intentionally used as weapons to run over people or run over officers, and there are times that instead of banning anybody ever being able to use lethal force at a car that's being used as a weapon, we feel it's better to address and outline in our policy when that use of force is appropriate versus saying a sweeping policy that just prohibits action altogether. If somebody uses a weapon as a lethal force, then officers, have to respond to that. And again, we train officers to try to stay out of the way. And like I mentioned earlier, if I'm standing in the middle of the street and a car's coming at me and I don't have time, distance, or shielding to get away from that, I don't have a lot of options left in my tool belt, if you will, to manage that situation. And again, those aren't frequent, but they have happened. So I don't know about shooting at moving vehicles. Anybody had any questions on that or things that have come up? The seventh thing is require use of force continuum. We have our response to force policy contains a type of force response continuum. A lot of times, instead of hearing me saying use of force, I'll say response to force, because generally what that means is someone has already shown they've taken a position of force, and we're responding to the force that's been presented. We're not out initiating force without undue reasoning. And so if you hear me use those words synonymously, I mean, our verbiage is response to force. It's going to be synonymous with what you see in the public by saying a use of force. So hopefully but one of our guiding principles is a force continuum is really kind of a linear approach, meaning it's kind of like, this is the only way it works. You have to go like this way. When those things are so fluid, sometimes you might go from talking to somebody to the highest level. But our guiding principle is what the law says, and the law references a 1989 case called Graham versus Connor, and it refers to objective reasonableness, and that is our standard in all law enforcement that you'll find. That's what the courts hold as what's allowed. So what's objectively reasonable based on the situation will be really the standard that is evaluated by the courts and is used in our review process as well. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with force continuums or that terminology much. Helen is. I didn't know if anybody else is, but you can find a lot of different things that are available out there that probably speak on that. Anybody have anything on the force continuum piece and these may be newer words for some people. So if you come across something and a question comes up after you find that, please let me know and we'll work with that. So the number 8 item is require comprehensive reporting. And I tried to cover this. I think I covered this pretty well on the very first bullet, where I talked about, supervisors notified, then ambulances will respond based on the situation. Response to force report is completed. Pictures are taken. Any video is tagged. In-car video, they have to tag their video, and now it's saved so it doesn't disappear. There's many times that it happens off scene. You end up running behind a dark building or down an alley or in a house, and there's no video. It just isn't going to be available. And so we're not opposed to body cameras. In fact, if funding is there, we'd be willing to do that. In fact, most of the officers would like to have that, because it would actually clean up a lot of situations. But if we were just, and I don't want to get into, I don't want to get off the comprehensive reporting, but going out and just buying cameras would be doable. There is a lot of other factors that weigh into that, and it may be something we could have on another time since we're short on time. But for us to pull that information based on a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, and make those available to anybody that asks for those, we figure we're going to need about 3 people to manage all the video that would be created, because there is some redacting that would have to go in, possibly on some of that, which basically means we would have to manage what information is going out. We're not sending people's date of birth and social security numbers out that are being read on the video, and trying to protect, to some degree, the identity of some. And then obviously, if it's a closed case, none of that would be available anyways until the case was adjudicated in court. So I kind of skipped right into the I know Roman and we've had discussion. Roman's talked about body cameras for many years, and there's a lot of other parts to make that system work, because once you go with body cameras, going away from them isn't really a good option. So how do you build that in, one-time funding? How do you build that in the next 3 to 7 years, whatever the lifespan is of that, to keep the system up and running with upgrades? And anyways, those are hurdles. I'm not saying they're the things that are going to prevent us from moving forward. Are just things that we have to figure what we can work through to provide that. So let me go back, as far as comprehensive reporting, what are the things that or have heard or you think of when you hear comprehensive reporting, after I kind of give you a flyby on how we respond to that? Let me mention first, we do have, I told you that those reports, when they're done going through all the chain of command to the chief, they go to the internal affairs captain, and he files them in. So we have a database that tracks all that information. That is kept for review and patterns. So anyway,
Yeah, could I ask a question about comprehensive reporting real quick? So does that include any witness statements? And if the victim is alive, does that include their statements too, where you got a cross-reference of, or is it just a police statement?
It's basically going to be all the information that we take in. So a lot of times when the sergeant goes and takes a picture of the suspect, there's dialogue with the suspect in terms of a lot of times they won't even let us take their picture. Not a lot. There are not a lot. That's not fair to say. There are sometimes they won't even lift their shirt up so we can see where we tasered them, and we're not going to go fight them just to get a picture of a taser mark in their back or wherever. So again, there's dialogue between this first line supervisor and the suspect, but all those situations vary in how they unfold.
And one last thing. You go. No, you go.
Mine's about you talked a lot about body cameras, and I learned this year that all of the police officers have microphones, correct, on their body, and that the vehicles have cameras themselves. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I just think that is helpful for citizens to know that even there are some new studies with body cameras and how effective they are, but that's not for this discussion. But it's good to know that all of the police officers do have microphones on them, and that there are cameras. They're just in the vehicles, right?
Correct. And that will say, like, if an officer is working off duty, it's likely they're not gonna that microphone. Call it that microphone's connected to a car that has a camera on it. So if they're working an off-duty job that doesn't have a car, there is no audio that captures that. If they get more than, depends on line of sight from the car. A lot of times the uses of force, the response to force happen because somebody's trying to flee, or and when they run behind the house, then you don't hear it. So and on a rare occasions, it may not be synced up because there is the system periodically wants to update or reconnect because it's all ran through internet. And if something messes with the signal, sometimes they'll get bumped, their micro will get bumped off of the car system. So now if they don't recognize that before the next incident happens, then there are times that we don't capture that. Of course, it just doesn't look good when you don't have that. It looks like, well, really, you don't really have that, and that's convenient, you know. But it really, there are things that do come up that it just happens, and it loses sync, or so we address those in all of those situations in our after action reports. Like in mine, I have to put in there, or one of the supervisors before me will say, I sent this to fleet maintenance because this is a problem and we need to troubleshoot this system because this system keeps getting bumped off. And so it may not result in any type of verbal warning or discipline to the officer. It may be a mechanical issue, but we document those, and it goes in our after action on every pursuit and every use of force that goes that way. And so we do that, and those are just things that we try to manage and mitigate the mechanical issues.
I was going to ask another question there that is important to me. So Michael Brown, I'm from St. Louis, so that always bothers me, his case. And there were witnesses that says that, you know, he was being followed. He was, things were being said to him that were incorrect socially. And then he was asked to come to the car. And then when he came to the car, he was kind of, you know, roughed up and pulled in. And it's a whole scenario. And there's so many witnesses that said that scenario. And then witnesses that says he was shot, you know, was saying, okay, forget it. And that makes sense if it's a young guy to say, okay, just don't shoot me. After all, no matter what went down. Why aren't the witnesses, now in Independence, if that went down, and I hope it never does, if there are 4 witnesses to say this happened, and they all sound pretty much the same, and there's one policeman that says this, will you still take in the gravity of weighing the situation, the witnesses and the police, or is the policeman's word law? Or do you take in consent, you know, the whole thing, especially if he's had things in his background? And let me add that to the conversation. I just want to know.
Well, I guess I don't know where to go with that, Nina, because I want to respond to the St. Louis shooting, and I don't know if you want to hear what I have to say, because
I do a little bit want to hear if it makes sense.
And I would rather be in person to tell you my thoughts on it, but
okay, just tell me in person then.
Okay.
Tell me in person one day.
All right. Anyways, well, if there's a shooting, there's different people that look at that. So the prosecutor generally will show up on the scene. If we have a police shooting, and particularly if it's life-threatening, the prosecutor comes in. So we're going to have investigators from Missouri State Highway Patrol or somewhere else. If we go down into Kansas City, we have one right now where one of my officers is on leave because he was involved in a shooting in Kansas City. Well, Kansas City's investigating that. We're not investigating that. I've got 2 of my officers off on 2 different shootings. And so Highway Patrol's doing one, Kansas City's investigating the other. So those are separate eyes that see it. Our internal affairs is going to look at it. The prosecutor's office is going to look at it from their own investigation. And then if the person dies, the medical examiner comes in and they do a separate investigation. So I'm not saying that I realize the fact that if there's a piece of information that's not shared, then that's lost. I'm not saying that couldn't be something, but there's a lot of hands in there trying to pull that same information to find out every nuance. So somewhere along those lines, somebody makes a statement to somebody that's in their record between all those different people touching it. So I think by and large, there are some checks and balances. Nothing's perfect in life, but there are some things that might help people know that we're not just taken off with everything that just as it looks on the surface.
Yeah, that's good to know, is checks and balances, because I'll always be concerned about, no matter how thuggish a person supposedly is or whatever, you have to ask the question, because it could be your child one day that could be thuggish. I'm not privy to that. You have to ask the question, is that what should have happened? Especially when they left his body out there 4 hours. That was a long time. And that's just suspect to me. But thank you. We'll talk about it one day, because I know you know the inside story. And then I'm from St. Louis. I know some stuff too.
I look forward to it. Good discussion.
Yeah, I respect you. You know that, Ed. Love you and respect you.
No, I want you to be able to see what you think.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through all 8 points, and I know we can probably drill into stuff more, and happy to do that when the time's available, and we can, I'm sure you'll hear things or see what other cities are doing. And the one thing I try to avoid is taking a national movement and trying to plug that into a local situation. Meaning, I'm not saying there aren't things that we can't glean from things that are happening around the nation or other larger cities or smaller cities, but I really, we want to police the people as they want to be policed, and we have to trust that we work with. We don't try to take a round peg over here in this part of the country and plug it into a square hole in our city, if that makes sense. So there's things we can take from every situation, but and we can try to figure out what parts of it are beneficial moving forward. And these platforms are very helpful and necessary to do that. I appreciate your all's willingness and desire to be a part of that. What else says? Those are the 8 points. I know, and I've got here on my notes just so you all know, and if you have other things, I've got on here that send out the department policies online, send out the profiling stats for last year. I think those are online, or I know they're online already, but I just, for the ease of you having to not chase them down, I can get those out to you. I think we have them on our website too, but I'd get with John Simon, make sure that, and then look at putting our policies online so that they're just available for all to see. Those are really the points I had in reply. Is there anything I missed on that you thought of?
Nothing that I can think of. I appreciate you, Major Turner, and your willingness to work with the citizens to come together and figure all this stuff out.
Thank you. I definitely don't have it all figured out, but I think we can figure it out together. I mean,
we're at the table together. That's the important thing.
You bet. Yeah, you bet.
And Major Turner, I'm a real intelligent, thoughtful person. And, sometimes I'm kind of like, I express with my hands, but know that there is a movement, but I do not judge my city on the movement, but I will not discount the fact that the movement exists, that I know people that have been hurt and killed, that my parents never made enough money as other people and had to march for it. And I was born in 1961. So I have to encompass it all. Even if things are getting better here, I have to be thoughtful enough to mention that it did exist. And it's a lot of people here that are older than all of us or younger than all of us, and they feel totally different no matter what I say. They want to say all lives matter. My grandma was a preacher. I know that already, but I will say that I will always mention that Black Lives Matter because they do, and because I'm affected by it. Whether it's someone living somewhere else, I just happen to be living on the greatest place on earth, but that doesn't mean that I don't care what happens to people all over the world. And so I'm a world thinking person, but I love this city, and I'm always very happy to be in the conversation, and that you all, we all talk about things, because there is pain in growing. There are growing pains. And I think we get over our growing pains very respectfully, very caringly. So don't even get me wrong. I'm kind of like an activist, and I'm kind of like kumbaya, We preachers' kids, me and you. You know what I'm talking about. So I have to say it all. If I didn't say it all, I would be remiss. You understand?
Well, and I mean, if we're being candid, I have reservation with the movement, capital letters, Black Lives Matter, their movement. I agree that Black lives matter in every environment, every community, but I have trouble with the movement Black Lives Matter because of their foundation of things, but in the defunding and a lot of things. And I'm not saying that pain isn't real and it's not being presented as they know to present it. I'm just saying that it's in stark conflict with many things that I hold true, and as we try to serve the community. So yeah, I don't mean any discredit on anybody, but I want to share where I'm at too in terms of that.
I always tell people, I like that. I want to hear, because I know you can't be different than who you are, but you definitely have to be who you are. And I respect you, and I know where you're coming from, but you got to understand where I'm coming from. Black lives do matter to me because I have 4 sons, and I've lacked in a lot of ways because I'm Black and African American, through jobs, even my husband or whatever. Age discrimination is a whole nother thing. Orientation is a whole nother thing. All of this is important to me. So I have to say, if you're African American, you have to say Black Lives Matter. And no one will get that but you. But I respect where you're coming from, but you got to know, no one can get that but me. But we can still come together and negotiate and understand that we all love each other, though. That's our common ground. But we're always going to be different. We like different foods. I like different things. So it's all right to be different, but respect and negotiation is very important in a marriage and in society.
Yep.
Major Turner, I think some of the notes that you have for the things that you said that you will look into and give to us and hopefully put on the website and everything. I think those are some of the recommendations that were made way back in March from the task force at the city council meeting, but I can't remember all of them. So I think either all of us or I can look at it and re-email some of those other recommendations, because you may be touching on all of them, but there might be some others that we're forgetting since it's been months since we so anyways, just for us to remember that there might be some more that we were thinking or asking of the police force.
No, sure, yeah. And I mean, of course, the COVID and just being disjointed, I guess, with everything going on. And if anything slipped through the crack on my end, please let me know. You're not going to hurt my feelings by reminding me or asking me where something's at. So I wouldn't be the first time. It probably won't be the last time, but I'm happy to try to fill those voids and build bridges so we can keep that communication alive.
Thank you for everything and being so transparent.
Sure, happy to be a part of the group and looking forward to still working for the. Hi, there's your kitty cat. That's nice. That's cute.
Yes, I echo that too, Major Turner. I appreciate everything you said today, and I think it's very, very important that the community has that information and that open dialogue with the police department to keep that understanding and to be able to support the department and the department have that understanding with the community so that it does work together and not against each other.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, out of all the groups I work with, I think this one probably starting to lose a lot of people here, but it would probably recognize that whenever, like right now, officers, we had such a roller coaster ride. You went from having COVID and being essential workers and people putting signs in the front of the police building. We support you, bringing stuff, dropping stuff off and within a week, people are basically throwing stuff at you, not always literally, and so that roller coaster ride of that response. And so now, from my perspective, you get the sensation on the law enforcement side that you start to get defensive because some of these conversations are harder because of the outright attacks and a national approach into a local community. So that's why I think sometimes the local perspective is important to make sure that our scope is on that and not the emotional strain that gets brought up by the national frenzy, and so that we can come to the table in a less threatening manner. But again, it goes on both sides. I'm not saying that that's just one-sided, but.
Did anybody else have any questions regarding item number 2 on the agenda? All right, great. So like I said, and thanks again, Major Turner, I think you did a really awesome job with that presentation. It was very informative, and I'm glad that we as a group were able to have that dialogue. I think this is important not only for this group, but I'm glad that obviously this is live streamed. So anyone else who would like to kind of see what you guys discussed today, that's going to be online for people to kind of review so they know what some of your guys' procedures are, what some of your procedures are, and what we're kind of trying to do and accomplish moving forward. So I'm quite grateful for that. So the last thing that I wanted to kind of discuss with you guys, last night we got a request from one of our council members regarding a resolution of support for the police department. And essentially what this council member would like us to do as a committee is to review this resolution and make recommendations so he can present it to the council and get council approval on it. But the language in the resolution he would like this group to look through to make sure that, it expresses what he wants, but also expresses what, the community would like to see in this type of support for the police department to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page as far as this goes. So I will get an email out to you guys later this afternoon with that resolution. I just want you to keep in mind that that's what we're looking for, is just to take a look at that, provide feedback. So we are going to wind up meeting again before that gets put on an agenda. And with that being said, I think our target date for that would be the September 7th agenda. So I'm thinking that we'll probably want to meet that first week of September so you guys can provide your feedback on that resolution. I'll send out another email to get schedules all lined up so we can have that meeting in September and give you guys enough time individually to look over the resolution, to compile your feedback, and then we can meet again first week of September. With that being said, was there anything else that anybody needed to discuss before we adjourn the meeting?
No, thanks, Major Turner, for the information that really helped provide some insight. Thanks everybody else for attending.
Yeah, thanks so much guys for attending. So we'll go ahead and we'll adjourn the meeting. And like I said, just keep an eye on your email and we will get the next meeting scheduled, and any information that you need from me, you guys have my contact information. So just reach out if you need anything.
Thank you.
We'll do.
Take care.
All right. Bye everybody.
Thank you.